Welcome in. Today's guest is Gerald Elias. He is a crime story writer, and his latest novel, Murder on Vacations, is a compilation of 16 different short stories. And we're kind of going to get into that today. So, Gerald, how are you doing?
Great, and thanks so much for having me. This is fun.
Perfect. Good. I'm glad. So let's just get right in there. What inspired you to start writing in the first place?
Well, that's a good question. I've always enjoyed creative writing ever since I was a little kid. I've got an older brother and sister, and even when I just began to read, they had all the old Hardy Boys adventures and Nancy Drew mysteries. So, I kind of grew up reading mysteries. That's kind of in my DNA. And I liked reading and writing all through school, but never really thought about becoming a professional writer until well into my career as a musician. And the first book I had planned to write was going to be primarily for violin students, and this was like in 1997, so I was already uh, middle-aged at best. Um, but that book, over the course of a dozen years, got transformed into a traditional amateur sleuth whodunit. And I won't go into details because it was a very long process, and years would go by where the manuscript was just sitting on the shelf gathering dust. But finally, I got people to read it, and I found an agent, and my agent found a publisher. It took a long, long time. And over that course of 12 years, it was an incredible education in how to write a book. I mean, at first I thought, oh, this is going to be easy. But then you realize, well, all the stories you have to tell have to connect with each other, and every word has to connect. And the structure of the book is important, and developing characters and getting the right voice and all that stuff. Um, so it's a great, great learning experience for me. So that was my first book, was called Devil's Trill. Um, and when we finally got a publisher, which at that time was St. Martin's Press, they asked if I would be interested in making it into a series, which I had no thoughts about doing until they asked me. But that eventually, over the course of several years, turned into an 8-book series, published not only by St. Martin's Press, but also Severn House, and then finally by Level Best Books. Um, and all those books take place in the dark corners of the classical music world, which was kind of easy for me because that's the world I knew from the age of 22. I was playing professionally in the Boston Symphony when I was 22. So I gathered all these stories that I heard from my colleagues and my own experiences in the classical music world, and wrote these murder mysteries. And so that's, in a nutshell, how I got started. And once I got the bug to be a creative writer, then I branched out. I've written Western mysteries, and I've written a lot of short stories, and now this recent book, Murder on Vacation.
That is quite the achievement. Congratulations on that, just for starters. It like you said, it takes a lot to write a book, and you have created so many. So, I mean, that speaks very highly of your ability to kind of get down all the creative words.
Thank you.
Um, so how did the characters first introduce themselves to you? Everybody kind of has that the voices just kind of came to my head, screamed at me, you need to write me. How did that happen for you?
Well, the protagonist in my 8-book series is a guy I concocted named Daniel Jacobus. And he is a blind, very curmudgeonly, reclusive violin teacher. He also happens to be an excellent musician and an first-rate amateur sleuth. So, I developed him through various people that I knew and from, reading other mystery authors and trying to come up with a unique character. Um, and I think he is pretty unique because he is not what one considers a very likable character, but on the other hand, he can be very lovable. Um, because he's very crusty on the exterior, but he has a heart of gold on the inside, and he's honest to a fault. He has no filters when it comes to telling people what is the reality of the situation. So, and by having been in the classical music world for so long and having been a violin teacher and having had students all around the world, um, I could develop secondary characters who kind of complemented Daniel Jacobus in a very more empathetic way, let's say. And there are two secondary characters who work with Jacobus. One is his former student, who's a Japanese violinist, young lady, who's just a terrific violinist and very Jacobus has no children, so like this young lady, Yumi Shinagawa, is almost like his daughter. And over the course of the 8 books, they develop, a very deep relationship. And the other main character is this African American cellist named Nathaniel Williams, um, who in the books he was at one time a cellist, but then went into the field of recovering stolen and fraudulent musical instruments and artworks. So, and they have a long history together. And he's actually based on one of my dear friends who passed away some years ago, but that's another story. Um, so those are the main characters in the 8 books. And the one good thing about writing a series is once you have your main characters, you don't have to create new ones every book. You just use the ones you have and just enable them to develop their own lives, and so that it doesn't become hackneyed or boring. So that was that story. In the new book that I've written, Murder on Vacation, is totally different. Has nothing to do with music at all. In fact, it's a collection of 16 short stories. And the main characters in this are an NYPD retired police chief named Maury Gross and his wife, Bobby. And they are a crime-solving duo, very lighthearted. And I grew up on Long Island in New York. Um, and so this couple, Maury and Bobby, I have them sort of as New Yorkers. They live in Queens, New York, and that's sort of the way they talk and the way they act, real New Yorkers. So the gist of these stories is that they're retired, and Bobby always wants to take Maury on vacation somewhere nice, lovely, get some R&R, take it easy, enjoy life. But everywhere they go, they get involved in a murder mystery because he has such a high reputation. Every time he goes somewhere, the local law enforcement authorities who are baffled by a particular case, they get in contact with him, and he reluctantly agrees to help them. So it was a lot of fun to write. And, the locations of these stories are everywhere from California on the coast all the way to Boston and everything in between. So lots and lots of fun to write.
Are any of those places you have been?
Well, that is an excellent lead-in question because that's how the book got started. My wife and I went to a niece's wedding in California in wine country, and we stayed at this charming little town called Cambria, right on the water. Stayed in a very modest motel and spent a long weekend there, going to the vineyards and walking on the boardwalk and all kinds of stuff like that. Very, very pleasant. But one day we drove up the coast a little bit to um, sort of a park where there were these elephant seals that were on the beach. I don't know if you know anything about elephant seals, but they are huge. They weigh over a ton.
Mhm.
They spend 11 months of the year in the water. They come up onto the beach 1 month a year, primarily to rest. They don't eat, but to rest, to cover themselves with sand so they can cool off, um, to fight with each other. And they fight because they want to be the dominant male in order to mate with the best female.
Mhm.
So my wife and I went to this park where, the guests could stand on top of this bluff with a chain link fence and look over onto the beach down below. And we would watch these huge beasts just flailing at each other, just banging their chests against each other. And they don't have tusks like walruses, but they have really sharp canines, and they would bite each other. And they've got these extended noses. They're almost like trunks. That's why they called elephant seals. And they would just bang at each other, um, and they would growl. You could hear it for like miles. So it was quite a sight. And me being a mystery writer, I got this idea of what would happen if, when no one was looking, someone threw someone over the fence
Ah,
onto this beach. I mean, they would just be torn to shreds.
yeah.
Um, so that gave me the idea for a mystery. But then, who am I gonna, what are the characters gonna be? And then we noticed along this boardwalk by our motel, this older couple that were dressed kind of like in 1960s Long Island getup. What might have been considered fashionable at that time. And it really struck us as being very funny and out of place. And that gave me the idea for the two characters, Maury and Bobby Gross, being on vacation. So I wrote a story about, a little mystery about the elephant seals and Bobby and Maury and wine country, but I just did it for fun. I had no thoughts about publishing at all. But then we went somewhere else on vacation. We went to Gloucester, Massachusetts, and I had another idea about, you know, at low tide, seeing someone's feet sticking up from the sand. That's the warped mind I've got. Um, so I wrote a mystery about that. And then one thing led to another, and I ended up with, about a dozen mysteries. And that's when I first thought maybe I'll get these things published. And my wife Cecily, who's my main critic, she read them and she really got a laugh out of them. Really enjoyed those stories. So I thought, okay, I'll try to get it published, and little by little, it got done.
With all the stories that you have written, is there one in particular or a scene in particular that was maybe more difficult to write or to get correct than maybe some of the others?
Wow. Yes. Yeah. And thank you for asking that. All of these stories are fairly lighthearted, summer reading kind of stories. And I mainly want readers to have a good time reading them, just to be entertained. But that being said, there are ethical issues involved, moral issues involved that I hope people think about when they read the story, but that's not the prime focus. And one good thing about Maury is that yes, he was an NYPD police chief, but he's retired. So he's not obligated to stick to the letter of the law anymore. He's just a consultant, basically. So he can make ethical judgments about things. He can think about what justice really means. Doesn't really mean you have to throw everyone in jail. Um, Sometimes the perpetrators have sort of a good reason for what they did, a sympathetic reason, just something to think about. But the one that was the hardest to write um, takes place in Seattle, which is my primary residence right now. And that is called Flotsam. And takes place on Juneteenth and involves an African American homeless person who has been killed. And so, it brings up issues of race and inequality and, real justice. Um, and so that, I didn't want to offend anyone. I didn't want to make any particular point about right and wrong. I left that for the reader to decide. Um, I even thought about maybe not even putting it in this particular collection because it is a little more serious. Um, but I ended up doing it because, I think it's good to have some variety of context in a collection. Otherwise, it's just okay, okay, okay. It becomes a bit predictable. So sometimes some of the stories are, just read them, liked it, next story. Some of them are, this was really more interesting. I want to think about this for a while. So, yeah, good question. Thank you for asking.
Would you mind kind of giving the audience a little taste of one of your pieces and reading an excerpt from one of the stories?
Sure. Which would you like first?
It is entirely up to you. Um, whatever you think is kind of, a highlight would, pull people in to want to give your books a chance or give your stories a chance.
Okay. Well, how about I play first, play something on the violin, just sort of as a little intermission between the book talk.
Okay.
Um, and then we'll get back to talking about the book and reading from the book. What I'm going to play for you um, is from the 17th century. There was a popular song in England called John Come Kiss Me Now. It was like top 40 for a long time. And there was this violinist composer named Thomas Baltzar. He was actually German by birth, but spent most of his life in England, who wrote variations on John Come Kiss Me Now. So I'm just going to play you a condensed version of it, just two of the variations, and then we'll go from there. Okay, just have to grab my
And for
violin.
anybody who's watching who wants to know reference, when we were talking through emails, he had told me that he's been a violinist since 1975, I think is
Well,
what you said.
that's when I became a professional violinist.
Okay.
I started playing the violin in 1960, so that
Oh,
kind of dates me a little bit, I guess.
but I am absolutely in love with the violin and the sound of violin. I could listen to somebody playing all day. And so I asked him, a couple different times of like, do you mind playing? Because I would love to hear that. And I'm sure there's other people out here who would love it as well. So he's gonna play a little piece for us.
Great. Well, I can't vouch for the sound over this computer, but I'll do my best. And before I play, I just want to mention that this violin that I'm holding here, this was made by my son, who is a violin maker. His name is
Nice.
Jacob Elias, and he just makes beautiful violins, and I love playing on them. Okay,
Perfect.
so here is John Come Kiss Me Now, just a little bit of it. So now back to books.
And now back to books. Um, do you have an excerpt that you would be able to read from one of the stories?
Yeah, in fact, I think the best thing to do would be to read the very beginning of the first story because that there's no murder that takes place on page one,
Okay.
but it gives you an idea of the feel of the book and also the main characters. And
Okay.
by the way, here's the book, Murder on Vacation, published by White City Press.
Okay.
Okay.
I've actually had quite a few authors come from White City Press.
Yeah, they're a nice bunch of authors, and the publisher, Jay Hartman, he's just
Yes.
he's a great guy. And have you spoken to him at all or
I
connected with?
have not, um, but I can't remember the first email that I got, and it had said, Jay Hartman from White City Press, recommended me for this podcast. I'm like, cool, who's Jay Hartman? And how does he know? And and then I got at least a half a dozen emails that said the exact same thing. And I'm like, this man must be like a fan of mine that I don't even know. I was like, I don't I was like, okay, he's my godsend right now or something because
Well,
he
yeah, I
sent
mean,
quite a few.
he's always looking out for the interests of his authors. So when something like this comes around, he lets everyone know. And yeah, he's really good at that. Yeah.
But you have to extend my gratitude to him, for sending you my way, for sending a few others my way, because yeah, I've appreciated it.
Great. I will let him know for
Thank
sure.
you. All right, to your excerpt.
Okay, Murder on Vacation. Believe me, I didn't ask for this. The wife wanted to do something special for my retirement from the force. I told her, Bobby, what I really want to do is lie on the sofa in front of the television with a beer and watch the ball games. But she insisted I deserved something more. What she really meant was that she deserved something more after waiting up nights for 40 years wondering whether I'd come home alive. So I agreed to the trip. California, wine tasting. She found a cozy little place called the Sea Lion Inn on Moonstone Beach outside a touristy town called Cambria. I can't complain. The inn was quiet, there were pretty flowers all over the place, and the service was friendly. Tom Flaherty, the inn manager, according to his name tag, checked us in when we arrived in the afternoon. Tom seemed to be a guy who just loved life and ended every sentence with a belly laugh. And considering the size of his belly, you can guess how happy he was. He must have been a native Californian because New Yorkers are not that happy, just as a matter of course. He even gave us a chocolate chip cookie on the house. Maybe I can get used to this thing they call retirement. The clientele was our type, not shishi. I knew that as soon as we pulled into the parking lot because the most extravagant car there was a Toyota Camry. After we got settled in, Bobby wanted to go for a walk on the boardwalk before dinner. It wasn't the kind of boardwalk that they used to have on Coney Island, where they sold hot dogs, cotton candy, Kewpie dolls, and all kinds of crap. It was just a boardwalk that meandered through the bluff above the beach. If you're the type who likes nature and the ocean, it was for you. Me, I would have preferred a potato knish, but I have to admit seeing live seals taking their siestas on the rocks was a sight I would not expect to see in the East River. They weren't even in a zoo. They were just out there, living. The wife pointed to a couple of specks in the ocean that she said were sea otters swimming on their backs. To my eye, they looked like seaweed, but I said, wow, sea otters. Anyway, who knows? Maybe they were. As part of my retirement vacation package, Bobby had bought me an outfit she wanted me to wear, striped Bermuda shorts with knee-high black socks, a Hawaiian shirt with an orange windbreaker, and a tam o' shanter with a pom-pom to top it off. I told Bobby I'd be the laughing stock if my pals saw me dressed like that, but she said that it was California style. I didn't see anyone else dressed like Mr. Potato Head in a Halloween costume, but I didn't want to get into an argument with the wife the first day of my vacation, so I let it go. How's
Oh,
that?
that was a good description. I was kind of giggling. When you were writing that specific scene, did it always sound like that in your head, or has that character and that scene kind of evolved since the first time you wrote it down?
Um, everything I write, from the first manuscript, first draft to publication, I rewrite continuously. Um, it's nonstop rewriting until the deadline. And then I send it in, and then the editor says, "Oh, you need to rewrite."
Again.
Um, but you know what? I love that part of it. I think that for me, that's the best part of writing is the rewriting. Um, a lot of people don't agree with that. They don't like to touch a manuscript after they've written it. And I think one of the reasons that I like doing it so much is based on my violin playing, which is, when you learn a piece of music, you really have to practice it every day, make it a little bit better every day, make some changes here, changes there, and the sound and the bowings, the fingerings, you name it. Um, and people have said to me, boy, you're really patient with your writing, waiting so long to get things published and rewriting. I said, well, I don't see it that way because I'm still practicing the same music now that I was practicing when I was 12 years old, and I still haven't gotten it right. So, um, for me, spending a few months or a year rewriting, to me, it's nothing at all. Drop in the hat.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about your publishing journey. Um, because you've worked with it sounds like a couple different publishing presses and then with you've had a literary agent.
Yes. Mhm.
Okay. Um, so can you kind of talk about how what the process was like trying to query your writing and how that all went and then inevitably how the different presses have really helped you and um just kind of getting your work out there. How has all that been?
Well, let me say this. When I wrote my first book, Devil's Trail, which, as I said, started out as sort of a nonfiction manual for violin players, um, I knew absolutely nothing about how to get a book published. Zero. Um, and it turned out that I was lucky in that regard because if I knew, I probably wouldn't have written the book in the first place. It is not easy to get a book published by a traditional publisher. Um, in fact, that journey with the first book, um, I had one agent and then another agent who helped me with it. My current agent is the second one. His name is Josh Getzler in New York, who's terrific. We've been together now since 2009. Um, and, and I finally got my first book accepted by a publisher. I thought, well, that's the end of the process for me. They're just going to sell the book for me and I'm all done. Take it to the bank. But what I didn't realize is that the editing process continues quite extensively, even after your book's been accepted. Um, and then um, these days, in this era, it's really up to the author to do the promoting and the marketing and all that stuff. which I had no idea about. Um, and, I know there's some people who are just like born marketing people. They just know how to do it, especially with social media. I knew nothing about social media when I started writing. This was 1997. I didn't even have a computer. Um, so, all of that was a learning process. And I got in through the back door because, I got hold of another author who liked my book, and she in turn got me to this agent who in turn got me eventually to the publisher, St. Martin's Press. So I never really had to write a query letter, which was, the standard way of doing things. I didn't even know that existed, that you did that stuff. So, if anyone wants to learn how to get a book published, I'm not the person to talk to.
Okay.
It's tough. It's tough. But the standard practice is get your manuscript in the best condition you can. Have a professional proofreader read it, go over it. It's worth the money because, we think as authors we can find, all the mistakes. Give it to a proofreader. I've had one work with me for years now, and I send her a book which I think is clean as a whistle, and she'll make like 10 corrections per page, and she's right. So that's my advice to budding authors. Once you've done that, then write your query letter. There are online tutorials how to write a good query letter. Send it to agents who do the types of books that you have written. Hopefully get a positive response, form a relationship with that agent, work together. Even the agent might have you do some rewriting. Not a bad idea. And then, finally to be ready to send it out to publishers. I think that's the common sense approach to take. It's a lot of
Okay.
work. That's how I would recommend. Um, as far as Murder on Vacation goes, that's a different story. Do you want to hear that story?
Sure.
Okay. I'll condense the story. So I had written, a baker's dozen stories and said, okay, want to get it published. And this proofreader who I'm talking to you about also was doing editing for a particular publisher. And we got hooked up and they wanted to publish my book. I said, great. That was easy. Unfortunately, it was an elderly couple who owned the publishing company. One of them got seriously ill, and the other one said, oh, I've got to take care of my spouse. So they just closed their doors. They shut down the publishing company. So that was publisher number one. Publisher number two was a publisher who I worked with on several books and published quite a few of my books. Um, but we started having these communication problems where they would give me deadlines. I would meet the deadline, but then I wouldn't hear from them for weeks or months. Things got delayed, releases got delayed. I couldn't schedule events, things like that. Very nice people and very competent, but things were just not working out. So I divorced myself from that relationship. Found someone else who liked my books, wanted to publish them. But then after several months, he said, guess what? I'm retiring. But I'm selling um, my business to a bigger company that does ebooks. And chances are they'll take your book, but since it hasn't been published yet, they might not. And if you want to waive our contract, fine. So I waived the contract. In the meantime, I got in touch with another author who I know, who, with one of her colleagues, was starting up a new publishing company. Um, and she loved my book. And I said, great, So they signed me up, and things were going great guns at first, but then out of the blue, um, they started asking for massive editorial changes. I mean, the whole concept of the book should change. You know, everything about it, every page, huge, significant changes. And I kind of balked at it. And when I balked at it, they tore up the contract. They said, we're done. And at that point, it was getting a little frustrating. And, I'm not a teenager anymore. And I thought, boy, I really don't need this. Um, so I said to my agent, I said, you know, you don't need to push my stuff anymore. You've got other clients who really are more needy than I am. Let's call it a day. And, I thought, okay, it's been a good life as a writer. But then on Facebook one day, I saw a post by some guy who I had no idea who he was, named Jay Hartman, who said, I'm starting a new publishing company. And um, if you're interested, send me a manuscript of something you've written. So I said, okay, why not? I sent him a copy of my Western mystery, which is called Roundtree Days. Um, and he actually read it and got back and he said, I love this book. Um, what do you say you write a sequel to it? I said, great, let's do it. Um, and I said, but you know what? I also have this manuscript of these short stories. And can I send it to you? And he said, sure, send it. So, you know, long story short, that's how Murder on Vacation finally got published with White City Press, the fifth publisher. If that hadn't worked out, I don't know what would have happened, but I'm more than pleased at the way it's turned out.
So outside of the writing, um, you know, people, your audience, they kind of like to know the human side of the author, the fun and the non-literary pivot. So outside of writing, who would you say that you are?
Oh man, I have a diversity of interests. This morning I was out in the garden mounding potato plants. I like gardening. Um, my wife and I love going camping, though these days getting in and out of a tent is not as easy as it used to be. So we do a little more leisurely type outdoor stuff, but we love the outdoors, going on hikes. Um, we like cooking very much. I do a lot of cooking. We spent a year in Italy some time ago, where I learned something about cooking, and that's one of my fun activities. Not only the cooking part, but going food shopping is, I don't know, some people just hate it, but I like checking out the produce and making sure it's what I want, all that kind of stuff. So cooking's fun. What else do we like to do? Well, we lived in Salt Lake City for decades, over 30 years. Um, and we have a daughter in Seattle, who has two little kids. And during COVID, it was impossible to travel. And, we didn't know how long we would live. It was really scary for a long time. And we thought, boy, we really want to see our grandkids. So we said, what the hell? Sold the house, moved up to Seattle, and we love it up there. So being grandparents is one of our great joys because now we're just a 15-minute drive over the West Seattle Bridge, and we spend a lot of time with the grandkids taking care of them, or when our daughter and her husband are hard at work. Um, I also have a son who I mentioned, the violin maker, Jacob. He lives in Ithaca, New York, with his wife and two little children. Um, And right now I'm speaking to you from West Stockbridge, Massachusetts, where we've owned a little cottage in the woods since 1976. That's 50 years now. Jeez. Um, from when I was playing in the Boston Symphony. So we spend summers here and a month or two in the winter. And that's our opportunity to go visit Jake and his family. And we love being grandparents to them as well. So um, I think those are most of the things we enjoy doing. We drink a lot of coffee. I shouldn't forget about that. Coffee lovers, making coffee, grinding coffee, whatever, anything that has to do with coffee keeps us going in the morning anyway. Yeah, so those are the main things.
Um, do you enjoy reading? I know some people, who are writers, they love they love reading, and others are kind of not so much. Where do you fit in there?
Um, I do like spasms of reading. I'll get into a reading groove and read a few books at a time, but for the most part, not.
Okay.
Um, and when I read, it's more for just enjoyment than trying to find anything profound because the way things are in the world these days, I just want to, go away
Escape?
in my brain. Um, my wife, on the other hand, she reads all the time, mainly nonfiction, about issues of the day, biography, history, all kinds of stuff. And she tells me about the books. So I get them secondhand. Without having, I get the main points.
Have you ever read a book that made you wish you had written it?
Um, Not a particular book, but particular authors I have great admiration for. A couple that come to mind right off the bat are, do you know Donna Leon? She's written probably 2 dozen mysteries that take place in contemporary Venice. Wonderful series, and her style is very human. She has people, they're in the middle of a conversation, and then one of them will realize that he was thinking about something else during the conversation and has to ask again, what were you saying about that? The sort of very perceptive way that humans really behave, um, and a very thoughtful writer as well in terms of ethics and morality. Another author who I love is Walter Mosley, African American author, who's he has several different series, but the one that really grabbed me was his first, the Easy Rawlins series, which takes place in post World War II Black neighborhood of Los Angeles. And that has nothing to do with my life at all. But when I read those books, I just felt like I was living there at that time in that place with that skin color. And I thought, boy, that is some convincing writing to be able to do that. So, one of the things I don't do when I'm writing a book is reading other mystery authors because I don't want to be imitative. I want to be inspired by them and kind of have a sense of their style. But if I start thinking, oh, I'm going to write like, Walter Mosley and Donna Leon, my brain would just burst because they're so different, but they're so, so compelling. Yeah.
I'm that way as well. That's kind of my non-negotiable writing habit. I can't read, other romance novels or romance suspense novels because I don't want to accidentally, plagiarize or you know, kind of take on a style of writing that's not my own. Like you said, with the in with the imitation, because it's not something I think you do consciously, but it can kind of happen if you are, really absorbed in another book. And so I am I'm that way. I avoid reading other books, mostly just in general, reading it all when I'm writing because I want to be able to focus on my story and my style and not accidentally kind of fall into their world and have everything kind of change up on one, not intentionally, but it kind of happens.
Yep. My favorite thriller author is John Le Carre. I don't know if you've read his books. Not only for the way he develops a story, starting from this little detail and gradually over the course of the book, that little detail becomes this huge issue, international intrigue issue. But his mastery of the language and his nuance when it comes to the language is just brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. And, I found sometimes when I was writing, I would start kind of being imitative, which is impossible because he's just that good. Um, but I did write a parody of John Le Carre's style in a short story once called the Case of the Burked Busker, that takes place in London, and it has an MI6, character in it running the show. So anyway, that got it out of my system. And I did write a self-published collection of short stories called "It's a Crime," that you can find on Amazon, and it contains that story if anyone's interested.
Okay. Yeah, that is great. Uh, so Gerald, I've really appreciated talking to you today and you, going into detail about your publishing journey and your books, and playing a little piece on the violin for me because, yeah, I am in love with the violin. Um, so before we go, can you let everybody know where they can find you on social media? And more importantly, where can they buy your books at?
Ah, good question. Um, Social media. I've got a profile page on Facebook. I have my own website, which is www.mysteriesandmusic, all one word, lowercase, .com. And as far as the book is concerned, you get the best deal by ordering it directly from the publisher, which is a lot less expensive than even Amazon, like 30% cheaper than Amazon.
Oh, wow.
Plus, he delivers worldwide for free. So it's a great deal. Murder on Vacation and White City Press. Uh,
Okay.
yeah, and they've got their own website, of course.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much for being on the show with me today and sharing all your insight, all your information, and you know, all your stories. I appreciate all of that.
Well, thank you. It has been my pleasure as well. So I appreciate it.
All right. Well, you have a good rest of your day, and I hope that we are able to chat again sometime.
Right. Let's plan on it.
Perfect. I will talk to you again.
Bye bye.
Bye.